What happens when we think about securing emerging technology? We go through these waves of technology transformation that introduce new capabilities to our organizations, that unlocks a lot of great potential, but then brings a side order of risk with it every single step of the way. So during my time, I've been through 4 waves as I think about them. When I started working, I worked in a small office that had a local area network and a file server, and we had email for the first time, and we were just starting to email our vendors and get, I worked at a translation agency, and we were getting project files back as email attachments instead of as faxes or as printed out letters and things. And that was novel, right? It was really, really cool. But it introduced what I think of as 2 new risks: first-party risk and third-party risk. What were those first and third-party risks? Well, we actually put a website online for the first time, and then we started to put a portal out there for our translators to submit project files. And thankfully, we were not one of these companies, but we now had internet-facing servers that had vulnerabilities on them. And then we started to make more and more shifts as we moved more applications up. And we went through wave after wave of this transformation that I'm going to get into a little bit more as we go into. But then we also had third-party risks. So our translators are emailing us files. Some of those files had viruses in them because they had viruses on their local machines. So these are risks that are outside of our control. So the way I think about it is you have your first-party risks that are things that you own, basically, and your third-party that are outside of your control. You think about that shared responsibility model. You are always in control of your first-party risks. You are sometimes not in control of your third-party risks, but they have an impact on you, and you are responsible for them. So these are just a couple of examples. So let's play that out in practice. How did that actually manifest itself into things that happened, bad things that happened in the real world? Thankfully, probably didn't affect too many people in this room, but certainly my data was in that Equifax data breach, my credit history, etc. How did that happen? First-party risk. They put a portal online with a known vulnerability and a default admin username and password. That is stuff firmly within the control of the organization who put that thing online. They were responsible for it. Other things. Anybody in the room go through the Melissa virus? Yeah? Just a couple hands, okay? The older folks in the room, myself included. You might remember how annoying that was and how it came back again and again because somebody who was out of the office when the initial infection broke out then came back and they said, oh, what's this I love you attachment on this email? And they clicked it again and you had the second wave of it. And it just went around and around. So that was really annoying. But you can see some of the examples and hopefully that serves to illustrate my point about first and third party risks. So how has this evolved as we transitioned into the cloud? Well, no surprise, we had kind of our first party risks around cloud. Any guess what's going to be on here? Anybody know? Oh, could it be? Yes, it is the Open S3 bucket. I'm sure that nobody in this room has ever misconfigured a bucket to make it accidentally public. I'm sure, because nobody would ever do that. But what about the third-party aspect of it? Well, what it turns out happens as we go through these technology transformations is that attackers learn how to leverage these tools as well. And that happened in cloud as well. Attackers learned how to leverage things like IAM roles for lateral movement within AWS environments and other cloud providers as well, and use that to find and exfiltrate sensitive data. So now when we think about our defense model, in the cloud environment, we not only need to account for our first-party risk, but we have to account for our third-party risk. And part of my question as we go through these waves that we're going to come to in just a second is, why is this so hard for us? Why do we get this wrong so often as we make this shift from one technology platform to another? In the mid-2010s, a lot of organizations migrated to the cloud. And when they made that initial migration, most of them moved in a lift and shift model. They took the way that they were operating in data centers and the way that they structured their infrastructure and software architecture directly onto cloud platforms. And over time, typically around the 2 to 3 year mark, they started to ask themselves the question, why are we not getting this agility that we were promised? Why are our bills so high? My Amazon, Microsoft, Google rep told me we'd be able to move fast and we'd be able to transform, at the drop of a hat and our bills would go down. Why did that not happen? Well, it didn't happen because your own operations model and your own software architecture didn't allow it. So typically around that 3 year mark, the organizations that I've worked with over the last decade or so come to this realization, we need to move away from that lift and shift. And we need to move into the era of quote unquote cloud native. or Cloud 2.0, or however you want to think about it. And you're going to hear the following buzzwords: container, microservice architecture, serverless, scale up, scale down, scale out, scale in, all of those things. And the reality is, if you do those things, you absolutely can unlock all that potential. You can get that agility. You can drive down those bills. You absolutely can get all of the benefits that the cloud promises, but you also have to kind of meet them there, right? That is your responsibility in that shared responsibility model, not only from the security perspective, but for how you're using the platform. Well, what about the risks associated with making that move? In the research that we've done at FireTail, one of the things that we've observed is that the major risk moves to the API. We move away from the S3 bucket open to the world because we've also gotten better at that. We've understood these risks now for a couple of years. And by the way, the service providers have gotten better at secure defaults around things like storage containers and things like that. But now we start to see cases like the Optus case. I don't know how many of you might have seen this. This is the second largest telco in Australia. One API in a non-production environment, but had a copy of production data on it. One network configuration, one unauthenticated endpoint, boom, 40% of the Australian population's data made public, right? 40%. That's a pretty large impact to a population that I think is roughly the same size as Canada's, right? So imagine if 40% of Canadians through, I don't know who's the largest or the second largest, Rogers, TELUS, Bell, whatever. One of those has an issue like this that exposed 40% of the population's data, right? And we've seen it south of the border as well. A division of Verizon called TracFone, very similar thing, 16 million records in their case. One vulnerability on one API led to a similar kind of breach. So why is it always so hard? Why do we go through these waves of transformation, but we're always running behind from the security perspective? And we're never ahead of the security risks that we're encountering? Well, part of the problem is the threat model. We mapped out a threat model around APIs here, and this is kind of a logical architecture, and this is FireTail's interpretation of that logical architecture, so your mileage may vary. But when we look at this threat model and you think about the tooling that exists in most organizations for defending against the new wave of threats, there's almost a 0% overlap. So the threat model introduced by the first and third party risks of the new technology is not covered by the existing tooling that we're using today. And this is also true as we make the transition into AI, and I'll bring that up a little bit later in the talk. So where are we today? We are today in the era of, let's call it Cloud 2.0, where we've kind of made the adjustment and we've gotten to this point where we're using cloud in ways that it is meant to be used, but we're also now adding AI into the mix. What does that mean? What are the risks that come about as part of that? Well, let's start with one kind of statement. There is no AI without APIs. As my marketing guy says, it's the silent P in AI, which I didn't want to put up there on this slide, but let's just leave it at that for a second. But why do I say that? Well, if you look at really almost any reference architecture for how you're going to build an agentic system or an MCP or really any kind of LLM-powered application, all of your integration happens over APIs. APIs are the attack surface of choice for all of the current AI breaches that are happening. McDonald's, Asana, on and on down the list. Event after event, we see that it is the exploit of the API that leads to those breaches. So, what about the threat model on LLMs? Turns out it's again the same thing. We have this threat model that has almost a 0% overlap with our existing tooling. So of course, we're not very good at securing AI and AI adoption right now. None of our existing tools give us any coverage for what we're going into. Couple that with the first time in my career that we're seeing a case not of, I hate this computer, it does exactly what I tell it to do every single time. For the first time, we have a piece of technology that is unpredictable and we're rushing headlong into it. Let's go. Let's use this thing that I cannot predict what it's going to do. So let's summarize. What are we facing? First and third party risks, new attack vectors, a massive increase in the speed to vulnerability exploitation, doing all of this primarily on cloud platforms. Every customer that I talk to, the AI as a service offering of the cloud providers is by far the fastest and cheapest way to get started in adopting these technologies. It may not be where you end up running production once you've kind of made your use cases concrete and get them towards production, but it is where the experimentation is happening right now. And we've got an attack vector that is often overlooked by most organizations and is now becoming the number one attack vector, especially as we adopt new technologies. And we're repeating a lot of the mistakes of the past. Just like cloud was shadow IT 10 years ago, AI is shadow IT today for most organizations. Current estimates are that 90% of AI usage within enterprise organizations is shadow, ungoverned, unregulated, etc. So my recommendation for any new technology from these 28-ish years that I've been doing this stuff is always start with visibility. If you don't know that it's happening, you're pretty much lost. Once you have visibility, you can start to get an understanding of the risk around the new technology. Then you can build policies, but you need to monitor for policy adherence over time. That helps you stay on track. When you have that background, then you can make decisions about what you block, what you protect, what you do. I would argue or posit to you that if you rush straight into blocking AI adoption within your organization today, you are actually just creating more incentives for shadow IT or more shadow AI usage. You'll get this false sense of security where you're like, hey, I'm good. I've blocked everything that goes through my proxy is great. What about all the stuff that doesn't go through your proxy?